The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with standards set by the Tennessee Department of Education. For more professional development videos, check out our website at www.mtsu.edu/CEM.
Welcome back, everyone. And Dr. Wilson, we're ready for our final presentation of this year's Summer Academy. And in just a moment, I will welcome our panel to the screen. But Dr. Wilson, the topic of our next presentation, trauma-informed interventions, is so very important. Do you have any comments on that topic before we welcome our panel to the screen?
First, I'm really excited about this panel. Trauma-informed approach is something that all school educators, all school counselors should that should be their lens in how they work with all students, how they work with parents, how they work with each other. I think it just lends itself a level of empathy that is so needed, and a level of understanding and support that is so needed by the people in our school communities. So I'm really excited for these next three presenters. I worked with them over the past year and they are phenomenal, and just can't wait to get to hear what they have to say. So I'm excited.
Okay, well, I also look forward to hearing the panel, but this is a group of experienced school counselors who know what they're doing. And so, and again, they represent elementary school, middle school, and high school so that we can see the spectrum here. And so I will welcome our panel to join us on the screen, and I'll introduce you. We have Lauren Baker, who is school counselor in Collierville schools at the elementary level. I'd like to welcome Ann Blake, school counselor, Collierville Middle School, and Bethany Erb, who is school counselor in Montgomery Central High School. So the title of the session today is Trauma-Informed Interventions, and I look forward to this discussion, and I'll give the screen to you now.
All righty. Thank you, Dr. Clark. I am very excited to present with my colleagues, Ann and Bethany, strategies for supporting students and really supporting all stakeholders in terms of trauma experiences, trauma-informed care. So what we plan to do is to present you with the strategies. I'd like to start with a base of where we're coming from and as far as defining the type of trauma we're talking about and what we're seeing in our schools, which I'm sure you all can relate to. I have worked as an elementary counselor for 16 years and actually became so interested in trauma care, trauma confident strategies that I have actually gone into private practice as a trauma certified therapist. So hopefully I'll be able to bring some of that knowledge to you today. All right, next slide. So the DSM is kind of for mental health anyway, is kind of our guidepost for at least having a common language to define certain issues, disorders, however you want to talk about mental health issues. And currently the DSM-5 defines trauma as involving or witnessing or experiencing death, serious injury, or sexual violence. That definition, while it serves a purpose, doesn't necessarily help us in what we're seeing in schools. And if we look at the next slide, which is information about the ACE initiative that came out of Kaiser Permanente in California, that is actually where we gained a whole lot more knowledge about the impacts of trauma. The ACE study really kind of brought to our awareness that trauma isn't just about the classic PTSD that we would see in soldiers returning from war, someone who was physically abused, things like that. It is that, but it's also so much more. And since that first ACE study happened or was completed, there are many more studies. There's a Philadelphia ACE questionnaire. There's different types of questionnaires out there now that include even more aspects of trauma experiences. Poverty, culture, race, all of the impacts of what we're seeing currently in our society can be seen as traumas. Think of it like we've got our big T, capital T traumas, which would be similar to the DSM version or definition. And then we can also have smaller, lowercase t's that happen throughout our childhood, throughout our life. And all of those, when you put them together, if you were to take a person's lifeline, can add up to some serious impacts. And we've seen, and I'm sure you all have seen, impacts in terms of academic success, mental health, physical health, and even later on, economic health, because the more ACEs you have, adverse childhood experiences or traumas, the more likely you are to struggle with holding down a job or completing your college degree and things like that. Today, if we can move to the next slide, we are going to also talk about, there basically are two different types of categories for trauma impacts. They fall into interpersonal, and those are the ones that really the ACE study kind of looks at. The chronic exposure to domestic violence, addiction, physical abuse, poverty, the ongoing impacts of those little T's that really can influence the brain development of the students that we're working with, and also the adults, our stakeholders in our community. Then there's also non-interpersonal. Those would be, think about students who you've worked with who have been in a car accident, or there was a natural disaster, a fire in their home, or something like that. Those are short-term, one-time events, and they have impacts. So I don't want to diminish the importance of these types of experiences for our students. However, the impacts can be worked through, especially depending on their resiliency factors. We're going to be focusing on strategies that really help support all of them, interpersonal and non-interpersonal traumas, but we're really looking at those chronic, the issues that our students are facing. All right, so we're going to head into the strategies, and I'm going to kind of start like our tiers, like we're going to go school-wide, and then I'll hone in specifically on elementary strategies, and then my partners will take over and help you with the middle school and high school strategies. So next slide to school-wide strategies. School-wide strategies, it's really important to look at starting with the adults in the building. I remember when I first started giving trauma presentations, and I'll mention this in a later slide, I became a trainer for building strong brains through the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth. And it's a phenomenal training. I have a link to it later on in the presentation. So what I found was after I gave the presentation, I had many teachers and educators coming up to me and saying, I never thought trauma was this. I always thought it was, exposure to serious, severe violence. So school-wide strategies, we really need to reach out to our adults first. And that is going to be the best support for our students, is expanding the knowledge of adults' awareness of trauma and the impacts that it has. So if you'll move to the next slide, we will see that if we start by increasing the knowledge of students or of families and staff, we can vicariously support our students, because I think adults become more sensitive to the behaviors that we may see as far as trauma symptoms in the classroom. So here are some resources for supporting staff and families. There is a group, it's called Support for Students Exposed to Trauma, and they have online trainings that are free that are meant for educators and school counselors. And this is a course that will, similar to Building Strong Brains, will give you the base knowledge of impacts of trauma, and then the best response that adults can offer to students who are struggling. You can also reach out to Building Strong Brains Tennessee, and they have trained presenters who can come to your schools that offer informational sessions. Again, giving that broad overview of how to support students and families who have experienced or are experiencing traumas. Another important thing is to develop a comprehensive referral list that includes trauma certified professionals. Trauma definitely is, as it should be, is really in the spotlight. We're so much more aware of it. But with that spotlight comes a lot of people who maybe know a little bit about trauma, but don't understand the full treatment protocol to do it ethically and professionally. So we want to build that referral list in our districts, in our schools, remembering all professional school counselors, there is a law in Tennessee that protects schools, LEAs, and we are allowed to refer as long as we give several professionals. So have your district supervisor, or if you don't have a district supervisor, have someone reach out to find those qualified professionals. That would be for our, those students who may not be responding to the interventions that we're putting in place in school. All right, and next slide. Here, as I mentioned, is the information about Building Strong Brains. It's a phenomenal organization through the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth. They are working actually with, as Christy Steele mentioned, the cohorts who, the school districts that have become involved in the cohort for trauma-informed schools. Building Strong Brains is supporting that through the DOE. So I highly recommend it. You can become a trainer through this program or through this organization, and it really developed my awareness of how to support students in my school. All righty, and if we go to the next slide, we're going to start off with elementary level strategies. And you'll probably see a lot of this overlaps as far as, elementary, middle, high, but it's going to look a little different. So the strategies may seem the same, but, we approach it a little bit differently based on their developmental level. So if we could go to the next slide, I want you all to take a look at some of the behaviors we may see in the classroom. So our brains are wired to protect ourselves. And when trauma is experienced, especially chronic trauma, it can interfere with the progression or the full cycle of our fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. A lot of times when trauma occurs, people get stuck in a moment as far as when the trauma was happening to them or when they were witnessing the trauma. And depending on where they got stuck, it may show up and come out as behaviors. So if someone is more hyper activated in the fight response, we'll see aggression, irritability, anger, difficulty concentrating. And here's one that we may not think about, but actually hyperactivity and silliness is a manifestation of fight, because it's an outward expression trying to protect ourselves. And so right in that column, you probably see a lot of the same things where we're all just assuming that this child may be suffering from ADHD. This is where assumptions can get very complex and a little bit tricky. I mean, we have to make sure, are we dealing with, is this ADHD? Is this a trauma response? chicken or the egg kind of a thing. A lot of the same strategies may support the child, but if we don't get to the core issue, which could be trauma, then we're just putting Band-Aids over gaping wounds. As you can see, the flight response would be isolating, avoiding, are more introverted kids who tend to want to escape. And that can be avoidance of others or avoidance of work. The freeze response, we've got, they just get stuck. They're frozen. They don't want to make anything. It's like playing possum. You know, I'm not going to make any trouble. I am not going to, hopefully you can't even see me. I don't feel anything. I just want to make other people happy. And they tend to be kind of that chameleon. You know, they just are adapting to their environment because they just don't want to be noticed. And then fawn would be someone who seems pretty flat. But also they are constantly aware. They might be that kid that, you know, every time a door opens, you know, they're very keyed in on that door. They tend to not move around as much. So, and these are just, you know, this starts us off on being able to identify some of these students and what these behaviors might mean. As with all mental health, you know, there are overlaps everywhere. So I think I also want to take time here for us to be careful about making assumptions. We don't want to start seeing trauma everywhere. We want to be able to act if it is appropriate, but we also have to remember that experiencing trauma doesn't mean always a negative outcome, because a child, an adult may have protective factors that help them work through that trauma. We all have experienced traumas. It is whether, you know, what were the supports that were in place? Who was that one adult even who might have been the foundation for the child to be able to cope? So we don't want to say, oh, we know this child has had this trauma, they must be feeling or doing or acting this way, because that's not always true. It's not a given that trauma will create some of these behaviors, because if there were several protective factors in place, the child may cope very well, even though experiencing a serious trauma. All right, let's move to the next slide. All right, if you are not familiar with Dr. Bruce Perry's work, I highly recommend that you Google him, read his books. The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog is one of his all-time, you know, famous works, and it's amazing. He actually has a model. It's called the neurosequential model for trauma recovery, basically. And he has a medical approach as well as a therapeutic approach. So you want to take that into consideration. However, his main model is we have to get to regulating the trauma response, that physical fight, flight, freeze, fawn, before we can do anything else. And it really is that self-regulation is the core of helping a child learn how to cope with their environment based on the trauma. Well, really any child, self-regulation is key. So we start with regulate. And then once the child is regulated, and we use co-regulation we talk about it in terms of co-regulation. So the more regulated the adult is, the better able we are to help that child regulate, to match our breathing pattern if we slower our rate of breathing, if we model taking a deep breath, if we connect with them by touch carefully. Touch can be a trigger for some students, so we have to kind of know our students. That comes from some of those minute meetings maybe that Amy talked about, and we want to be able to listen to them, to just feel with them, to kind of take some of our calm energy and make it theirs. Then we reinforce the connection with the child, the relationship with the child. all educators talk about relationships all the time, but this is where it really matters. If educators put in the time on the front end to build relationships, this step is a lot easier because the child already has a connection to you. Once we regulate and relate, then we can get to the cognitive reasoning part, and we can get to, hey, what were you thinking about at that time? How could we change that thought? We don't want to start there. And that's where most of us adults, I think, do start. I think we want to be able to help the child think their way out of it. But we really need to get back to kind of those core physical responses first. All right. I want us, if you move to the next slide, I want to shine a spotlight on Fall Hamilton Elementary School in Nashville. I don't know if any of their school counselors are here today with us. They have done amazing work with trauma competent strategies. Their whole entire school is trauma informed. They were spotlighted, I think, in Edutopia, which is, I love watching Edutopia or reading the articles. They have a system where, and this is for adults, I mean, they focus most of their energy and their interventions on the adults in the building. The adults are all trained in trauma-informed strategies. They understand the impacts that trauma can have on the brain. They actually have a tap-in, tap-out system for adults when they feel they're getting dysregulated. So if I'm in a class and I feel myself getting dysregulated and a student is maybe challenging me, I can go into this GroupMe app and ask for a break, and the school will send an assistant. If hang on just one second, I want to make sure my technology isn't going to lose me. They will send an assistant. Even the principal will go if nobody else can go, where that educator will get a few minutes to get themselves composed, do their coping strategies so that they can get back into the classroom and be more effective. So they know that breaks are better, that taking a break gives you that time to self-regulate, but adults need that too. And we're better able to educate students, especially students who have experienced trauma, if we are regulated. And that takes me to my next slide, which talks about breaks for students. So I think it's important to normalize breaks in class and also outside of class if needed. So what I used to do is start with my intervention strategies as far as, let's start with breaks in the class to see because we want the child to stay in the class as long as, or as much as possible, to keep their day pretty consistent. So we actually had a grant which funded some iPods where we were able to get some special binaural beats music on them, and students that we knew were struggling would be given time to either start the day with this music, because the binaural beats actually impacts brainwaves and it brings them back to alpha, which is where we're typically more calm and focused. So we had that as a strategy for inside the classroom. It took, I'd say, 15 minutes. For students that had it as a regular intervention, it took about 15 minutes in the morning. So during their morning work or bell ringer work or however you call it, they would listen to a track. And then after lunch, after like an afternoon recess, kind of the second half of the day, they would listen to it again if needed. Flexible seating, in elementary school, we can do fun things like we work under the desk, we stand while working, allowing students to kind of use that energy in the classroom, drawing and journaling, and fidget tools. And I have a star on fidget tools because I think we need to remind everyone, parents, teachers, everyone, that there's a difference between a fidget toy and a fidget tool. And I know you all know this. I'm probably, you're probably nodding your heads, but it used to be the fidget spinners. And then this past year, we were in person all year, and it became the poppers, the little silicone. They look like ice cube trays actually, and you just pop them. And they were so distracting as a person going into the classroom to teach. And also I noticed other students being distracted by them. That's not the purpose of a fidget tool. So I think we need to dial back some of this, what I've seen happening, at least in my school, and I'm assuming in your schools too, is kids are now coming in with all of this stuff and we're saying, well, this is my fidget tool, this is my stress ball. And we have to make sure that it's, number one, being used appropriately, and two, it actually is a fidget tool where it's just being used as a way to keep that focus going. And it's more of a discrete kind of movement with the hand or something like that. As far as outside the class breaks, you all do this. I just want to make sure we remind ourselves of these options. Basically having someone be their messenger. If you can put a heavy backpack on them, even better, because that heavy work can be something that can, in a sensory way, calm a student down. We've provided structured movement breaks. I know a lot more schools are having things like sensory rooms, movement rooms, calm down rooms. Ours actually had a swing and a trampoline, one of the small trampolines. So having those structured movement breaks for students where the in-class break is not working can really, pulling them out for 6 to 8 minutes versus them getting to the point in the anxiety scale where we're having a meltdown is so worth it, because they're not paying attention anyway. If they're coming up that anxiety scale, if we can hit the movement break prior to they get to a 5, then we are saving a lot of instructional time for everyone. Taking a walk with an adult, and also water breaks. Water is a very cooling sensory experience for many students, so that can be an option for you. All right, and lastly, I kind of wanted to show you how I divided my interventions at the elementary level. So for classroom lessons, I really focused, the last few years, I've been focusing a lot on social thinking skills. I actually got the curriculum through the social thinking website, and because it explains a lot about the brain science to kids, I think there actually has been some research that has shown the more we understand how our brain works, the better we get at being able to regulate, or to find options, or to build new neural pathways, because we're like, oh, okay, I have this pathway, but I really want to, I would like it to work this way. And kids really get into learning about the different parts of the brain, and, the frontal lobe, the upstairs brain, the downstairs brain. So I definitely spent a lot of time with those foundational skills, and also flexible versus stuck thinking. More and more, I was seeing students just they were so stuck. It's this way. The rigidity, I think, was really a struggle. And so by teaching the difference between flexible and stuck thinking, that growth mindset, and also explicitly teaching coping skills in class, normalizing it for everyone, not just keeping it in the small group or individual bucket, because when they all learn how to do it, they help each other. They remind each other to take breaths and to do the other strategies that we worked on. In small groups, I would teach more coping skills, especially if they weren't being able to access them, or they needed more practice from the classroom sessions. Also, our district was trained in CBITS. I think here it's important to take a note of caution, and reminding ourselves of our roles as school counselors. While we may be the only mental health professional that students see, we also have to remember that we're sending these kids after our 20-minute, 30-minute group session back to class. And so to focus on trauma experiences or major mental health issues in a small amount of time, and then, hey, let's go back to math class now, that can be really dysregulating for a child. And so for those of you that where the teacher says, hey, they're coming back to my class worse than they were when they left, that could be a reason why, is we're bringing up topics that it's difficult for them to transition. So, and I'm not saying to avoid those topics, but it's something where making sure you have that transition activity or you're using some coping skills before you send them back to class. The CBITS and bounce back trainings, you can Google those, and I think I put them in our resources page. Those trainings are available online for free. And then with individual therapy, I use play therapy. I have a sandbox, expressive strategies. A really great book to start with is called A Terrible Thing Happened. And it's basically the main character connects with his school counselor. And you never, in the whole book, you never know what the main character is upset about or what trauma they saw, but they work it out through drawing. And it's a great book to read to students who have experienced a trauma or chronic trauma, to help them normalize the feelings, because it shows what happens when he doesn't talk about things or he doesn't, he tries to just forget about it. That's really powerful. So now we're going to transition to middle school strategies and Miss Ann Blake.
Thank you, Lauren. I have to say it's very difficult to follow Lauren because she's so knowledgeable. Middle school, I've been in middle school for 9 years. I'm actually transitioning to the high school myself this year. So I've got a lot to learn, but middle school is kind of the bridge between the two. So a lot of the things you'll hear about are just the next level of what's going on at elementary school. When we talk about middle school strategies, I love that Lauren really focused on bringing the adults in the building along, because that's what we have to do. So much of our students' time is spent in the classroom and helping the teachers understand what trauma looks like and how it's going to look very unexpected. So next slide when you can. It's going to look unexpected. A lot of what we see in middle school looks very angry sometimes. And of course we do have students who withdraw. So much trauma, the Venn diagram between trauma and ADHD, there's a lot of crossover. So that's an important thing to remember. But a lot of what we see in middle school can look like a lot of defiance. And that's a really important piece to share with our teachers. That's something that the more we can help the other adults in our building understand what trauma is and how it's going to present, the better we are all going to be able to serve kids. I'm sure you've all heard it too, but a teacher saying a student had a blow up and a teacher's like, no, he was fine. He walked in, he was fine this morning. Helping them understand that blow up is a trauma response. He walked in fine, but the fact that he can't regulate himself when the tiniest thing goes wrong is very indicative of a trauma response. So next slide when we can. Like Lauren said, front loading those relationships is key. Not just for you, but for the other adults in the building too. Knowing when they get to middle school, a lot of times they're going to keep those things hidden. That's one of the things that when she was talking about the difference between those interpersonal traumas and those more public trauma events, really, if they've been in a car wreck for some reason, that seems more socially acceptable. So they've been in a car wreck, they've had a house fire, we all rally around that. But those private traumas are the ones that they may not share with you. So understanding them, knowing their background, sharing what you can with confidentiality with the teachers, and helping them understand that what they're seeing in the classroom could be a reaction to that trauma is huge. The blowing up, the defiance, I can't tell you how much defiance in middle school can be traced back to this. And this is something that we, as the team, have talked about students being re-traumatized in school. So a teacher getting, or an adult, I don't mean to pick on teachers, certainly, an adult in the school being dysregulated by a student's behavior and then coming hard at the student when the student's having a trauma response is just re-traumatizing that student. And I think we can all agree what we want school to be is a safe place for our students to engage and learn the life skills in addition to the curriculum that they're going to need for their own success in life. So the last thing we want to do is re-traumatize them. So it's so vital that we help the adults in our building understand what these responses are, what that trauma response is, and how we can help the students deal with it, and how we can help our adults deal with it too. So let's move on to the next slide. Some of the things you see in elementary school kind of get ramped up. A big concern is those risk-taking behaviors, because as we all know, the stakes definitely go up as they get older. We did talk about the defiance. That's what I see a lot of risk-taking behaviors. You won't see those necessarily in the school, but the students will tell you about those, or other students will tell you about those. In my middle school, that's what happened a lot, is other students would come to you with concerns about a student. A lot of those risk-taking behaviors. And the mood swings, that's a lot of times what the teachers see is those mood swings that are just so concerning to them and so much consternation, and helping them understand that what we have is a child who's not being able to regulate themselves. But it is really fun when you, maybe fun's not the right word, but it's so enriching to be able to talk to them about this and help students kind of backtrack. Okay, so what were you feeling and what got you here? As we all know, we can't learn a new skill when we're in crisis brain or in trauma brain, or when they're completely dysregulated. Then we are just trying to deal with that, breathe through it, work through it, and get to the next stage where we can learn a new skill. But it's so fun to be able to help them realize how they're feeling. And we talk a lot about where in our body we feel that stress and what it looks like, and seeing the light go on for them about, oh, you know what, I feel a tightness in my chest. Okay, let's talk about that. What do we do? And I love that middle schoolers are able to tell us what works for them as we start talking through some of these strategies. So I have to move. Movement is a big one for me. When I'm stressed, you'll see me pace. And being able to share that with them, and them saying, no, but I do like to listen to music. Okay, so let's talk about that, and being able to work through that. I have some teachers who I love how they have modeled this. I've had a teacher sit in front of the classroom and say, I was having a really rough morning. I was stressed, and when I came into the classroom, I just wasn't feeling like I could do this. So I had to sit down and do some breathing for a minute. And that's solid gold when a teacher will actually share with the classroom, I deal with stress too. Sometimes I have trouble with my emotions, and this is how I manage those. That's good practices across the board. And it's certainly going to help normalize for kids. Sometimes emotions are difficult to deal with. Sometimes we all struggle with that. So normalizing that and giving some strategies. This is how I deal with it. Might not be how you deal with it. But I just absolutely love that we have teachers who will be vulnerable enough to share that with the kids. And certainly that's something that we can share with them too. All right, let's move to the next slide. This is one thing Lauren talked about as well. A dysregulated adult cannot help a dysregulated child. So when we help ourselves and our staff develop that sense of calm in that moment, that helps. I mean, we all know this. We all know being able to match and bring down that energy level. So helping the people in the classroom understand that when a student's getting amped up, meeting them there is only going to make it worse. But when you bring it down and you lower your register, and you talk more slowly. It just automatically helps bring them down. I love the idea of creating a strong foundation of safety so that students can feel that safety and feel able to engage. I've seen so many students who came from really difficult situations for whom school can be a safe place, and it's not always magical. It doesn't always work, but when it does, we just see a blossoming that is amazing. And they know. I remember one time I had a student, a former student, who just ran to me, and back when we could hug before the time of Corona, just flew at me and just tucked up under my arm. And I had somebody ask me afterwards, how, tell me what that was about. How did you make this connection? Because this was a student that was not connected to many people in the building. And I said, they know, they feel your regard for them. They know. And when we make that foundation of a relationship of safety with them, they're able to grow and flourish and blossom. And that's one of my favorite things about being in school, is watching that. Okay, let's move forward. All right. So helping students recognize where they are and learn how to regulate that is vital. Part of that comes from us being able to help them, help model that for them, help our teachers and our staff model that for them. But again, one of my favorite things in middle school is students being able to recognize what works for them. So going through with them a checklist of things that may work. And I've had students who we have laminated a list of strategies and they put it inside their notebook. Now all my middle schoolers have iPads, but so that when they start feeling dysregulated, when they start feeling strong emotion or whatever it is in their body that they feel, if they start feeling the tightness in the chest, or if they start feeling their breathing, and we talk about how to recognize those things, we come up with a list of strategies they can do. And some of them are those visualizations that I know you know, distractions, whether it's read a book or draw a picture. Movement, like I said, is a big one for me. Breathing, going through the 5 senses. Any of those strategies that we can help teach them when they are regulated, so that they have go-to things when they start feeling strong emotions, are huge. I love them helping come up with their list of things that work. And if something's not working in that moment, moving to the next one. So teaching those channel changing strategies that you develop with the student so they feel ownership of it, empowered, and then with the student's permission, sharing those with the teacher or the staff member in the classroom so that the student then has a backup plan. So if they're starting to feel dysregulated, if they're starting to feel, as we like to put it in my building, some kind of way, they have someone in the room who can say, hey, maybe pull out your strategies. That can be really helpful if it's done in a way that the student feels supported. So let's move to the next slide. This is one of my favorite things, creating islands of competence. I love the idea of helping our students feel their voice, feel powered. One of the things about middle school, again, that I love is having students learn to advocate for themselves. Having them, again, with their permission, sharing with the teacher or the aide in their classroom some of their strategies. And it gives the students such a feeling of power over, they felt so disenfranchised by their trauma and by not being able to regulate themselves, and possibly by being in a school building where nothing's going their way and people aren't understanding what they're going through. There's so many things that have taken that away from them, and having them feel that power, feel in control of themselves, and being able to regulate themselves and be able to say, yes, I'd like this person. I'd like to identify this person as someone who can help me with that. I love that. Helping the students, helping them challenge their negative thoughts. I mean, us challenging it is great, but helping them focus on their strength. I love telling a student, I know you can do this. And that's not just me being a counselor and believing in you. I believe in you because you are doing it. I've seen you do it. You show up every day and you are doing it. And you can't deny that. You can get in your negative brain all you want to, but the evidence is that you are doing this. And helping them feel that confidence is just a wonderful thing. Contrive areas of strength when necessary. I had a student who struggled all the time, and he had a teacher who went to tell him, gave him a piece of candy and said, you made the second highest grade on the test. Now, I don't think anybody's getting an award for making the second highest grade on the science test that day, but this was a student who struggled, and he talked about that for a really long time. That teacher, without even realizing what he was doing, contrived an area of strength for that student, and it mattered to that student. So help build on those areas of strength and encourage people in your building to focus on those areas of strength so that the student focuses on the areas of strength and the things they can do. I do want to talk about exclusion because that's a big thing. I want to always make sure that our students feel like taking a break is a positive thing, that hopefully this is something they're in control of. Now, we're going to have times when our students are not in control of themselves and need to be removed from the classroom, but as much as possible, we need to reduce exclusionary discipline. It is so vital that our students feel like they are part of this community, and that they feel a part of that and feel welcomed and accepted no matter what. So when we do have to exclude or take a break, I don't ever want our students to feel like they are not part of this. As much as possible, it needs to be a choice. It needs to be a positive choice and not a punishment. Again, there are going to be times when we have a student who is out of control and needs to be removed from the classroom. But as much as possible, we need to frame that as this was done to help you regulate. As soon as possible, we want to get you, as soon as you are able to regulate and able to be part of the classroom, we want to get you back because you are a valued member of this community. Remember, this is a student who has been so possibly out of control in their own life, so many things that have gone wrong, that have gotten to them to this place, that we want them to feel and know that they're a valued member of our community no matter what. So that's a really important piece of this. I feel like I've gotten us to the other side of the middle school bridge, and I'm excited for you to hear what Bethany has to share, and I'm excited to hear your questions after the presentation. So if Bethany is ready, I am going to turn it over to her.
I am ready. Thank you, Anne. So as we mentioned before, I do work at the high school level. I have 12 years experience working in high school, so beginning my 13th year. Hopefully I've learned a few things, but I feel like I'm always learning. And so one thing I guess I would encourage you to do is as you listen to the high school strategies, even though it is kind of coming at the end, be able to kind of look at it as kind of a big picture. So instead of looking at high school by itself, take what you've gotten from elementary, take in what you've gotten from middle, and be able to tweak those in the ways that you need. And so I kind of looked at these strategies from a high school level in that, at the high school, a lot of times we spend time in our office and it's more individual probably than anything else. And so how can we as high school counselors help students who have been impacted by trauma from that lens? And so you're going to hear some of the same things we've mentioned before, but kind of take those where they are. So next slide. So in addition to what you've seen with younger students, now you're looking at students that are coming into high school. So there's a lot of times that you have 13 and 14-year-old freshmen in the same building as an 18-year-old senior. And so because of that, you're going to see increased risk-taking behaviors because those younger students, they want to fit in. If they're a new building, they want to be around people that they consider their peers, even though when you look at them side by side, you wouldn't probably put them together. They still want that. And so now you're looking at students that have increased access to a number of things, including a vehicle that weighs a ton. And so those behaviors are going to see increase because of the things they have access to. You're also going to see them spending more time with peers than ever before. And that social aspect is going to be very important, whether it's in person or online. And so the defiance that you see is trying to fit in and trying to find their own. A lot of what you see in middle school kind of transitions to high school that way. And so you're going to see that in the classroom, and you're going to see that also outside the classroom. Withdrawal or change in social activities. I've dealt with students that they've been in band for the last 6 years, and all of a sudden they get to high school and band's just not the thing for them anymore. And that can be fine, but they're trying to figure themselves out and they're trying to find a new place. They could be lashing out. This could be verbally. This could be online, because that's kind of a safer, I'm going to use air quotes, a safer place to express how you feel. And so they typically will do that more often. You may also see them avoiding the classroom. These are your elementary school runners. Don't get me wrong, I've had a high school student walk down the highway, so maybe it is a runner. But more than likely, this is going to be your student that just doesn't show up to class. They spend time in the bathroom. They go out into the parking lot. Mom says I dropped them off, but the teacher says, well, they never made it to class. And so those are some of the things that you're going to be seeing. And then middle school, I feel like kind of begins this. But then in high school, you really start to see romantic relationships develop. And I feel like at the high school level, you start to hear more about what that's like for them. It's not just friend-to-friend conversations that they're struggling with. It's romantic relationships. And the trauma that they have comes up in those relationships. Or sometimes those relationships are where the trauma happens. And so that's what you're going to see. So next slide, please. So what do we do about this? You've heard this before, building relationships, and you're going to keep hearing it because that's at the start. I feel like when I was in graduate school, the word I heard over and over and over and over and over was rapport. And it's so important. And yes, you should. And I think as counselors, you should be able to, the first time you meet a student, we're expected to build rapport in 30 seconds flat. And we can because we're people that love people. But I think you also need to back up and find where can you build those 30-second rapport before they get to your office. So think about, especially at the high school level, how can you get out of these beautiful 4 walls that you have made your office? How can you get out of those? Some of the things that we have done here at our school is we do counselors in a cafe. And so every Thursday we split up into different groups, and we are in every single lunch period in the cafeteria, hanging out, getting to know students. It's a great way, to see students kind of in a different element than the classroom. But it's an even better way for them to see you. And so being able to get out that way. I would encourage you to go to sporting events just because, one, students love to see you watching them do something they're good at or that they're still progressing at. And then also, it's a social event. I'll be honest, football wasn't really my thing in high school. I don't understand football. I didn't really go to the games to watch football. Why did I go to the games? Because I could sit in the stands and I could hang out with my friends. Couldn't tell you what the score was, but that's where, as a counselor, you can build those social interactions. Nothing against football, by the way. Sorry if you're a football fan. But awards programs, here at my school, we are in charge of those, but being part of the awards. So even if that's not something you do, going to those awards programs, again, watching that student be celebrated for something they worked hard for. Homecoming. I don't know if you guys had homecoming at your high school, but we do here, and it's a big deal. Now, some people that are adults in the building are like, I'm too cool for that. Let me just tell you, I have been Olaf. I have been Joy from Inside Out. I dress up as an elf at Christmas time, and I pass out candy canes that are individually wrapped. It's just that way to come out of your shell. You're not that high school counselor counting my credits. You're a person. And then the other thing I would encourage, and I think, I've heard kind of mixed reviews on this from different people, but some of those duties that are technically fair share, bus duty, car rider duty, hallway monitoring. I was so excited a couple years ago, our admin put us on hallway duty. My duty station is right inside the main lobby in the front door. Every day. It's my favorite place to be. It is 25 to 30 minutes where I get to see people come and go, and they're coming in. And it's helped me to find those students that 9 times out of 10 are bubbly, but that 10th day, not quite so much. And I know exactly what I'm doing the minute I get back to my office. When you're doing some classroom lessons, you can always focus on, they love to hear about why their brain does what it does. They think that's cool. So teaching them about stress, anxiety, mindfulness, focus, breathing. But keep in mind with trauma that give them the freedom to participate as much as they want to. So it shouldn't be everybody close your eyes. It should be, if you're willing, you can close your eyes on this event, and kind of walking them through that. In your office, have journals, have fidgets. This year, due to COVID, all my fidgets, even at the high school level, were those individual little party packs of Play-Doh. And the rule was, if you play with Play-Doh, it becomes yours. And, in high school students, they're like, are you sure? Play-Doh, really? And I'm like, yeah. And it's like this childhood comes over them, and like, who doesn't love to squish Play-Doh? So think about things like that. Sand tray, I think, one of my other colleagues mentioned that. That's been huge. I've had students that sometimes they don't even want to talk. They want to come in, play with the sand for a little bit, and then back to class they go. Some other things that I would recommend for you doing when it comes to relationships is, I think at the high school level, it's so easy to stay in your office. And I've mentioned getting out different ways before, but it's so easy to counsel a student in your office. It's so easy to try to get in that face-to-face counseling role. But I encourage you and I challenge you to think outside this office or outside the box and take walks with your kids. And I say that for a number of reasons. It could be about anything that they're dealing with. And that side-to-side counseling, it opens them up. I remember a couple of years ago, and our school has been very much impacted by those kind of big T traumas that Lauren talked about. We've had quite a few car accidents, and a couple of years ago, we had a student pass away in an ATV accident. He was one of our ag students, and a majority of his friends were boys. And I don't know if you've met a high school boy, but they don't want to talk that much. And so keeping them from shutting down and keeping them from kind of packing that in, we took walks. And I remember the student I went up to and I said, let's take a walk. And he was like, okay. And his parents had said he won't talk, he won't do anything. Within 2 seconds, not only was the kid walking, but about 5 minutes later, he's just spilling everything. And it's because the movement and that side to side gave him that freedom to do that. I would also encourage you to do things that are a little crazy. As you might imagine, since I dress up at homecoming, I'm not your average person. I'm a little out there. But I've allowed students to do yoga in my office. Not that I've led, I'm not a yoga instructor, but I had a student that said I said, you know, what works for you? Like, we've tried things. I said, what is it? And they said, I love yoga. I said, all right. I pulled up a yoga video, turned my camera around, and I actually left my office. And he did yoga in my office by himself for 10, 15 minutes. And then he knocked on the door and I came back in. I said, you good? He said, yeah, I'm good. So kind of doing things that are a little bit out of the norm. I'm probably strange in that I just leave my office sometimes and let students do what works for them, get themselves kind of regulated. The other things I would recommend for your office are be mindful of where you sit and be mindful of where your chairs are that the students will sit in. Where is the window located? Where is the door located in reference to them? I always, when students come in, I'll say, do you want door open or door closed? And it kind of gives some of that control back over to them. Because many times they didn't come to see me. I called for them. And so to give them that freedom of what they're willing to do. And then, you know, you also want to be patient. There are students that it's taken me probably 5 minutes and we're good. I had a student a few years ago that he had been so impacted by the adults in his life that he didn't feel comfortable opening up. He had almost gotten to the point that he was like, what's the point? And so he came in as a 9th grader. I got nods, grunts, and very strange looks. And I really thought he was trying to bore a hole through my head with his eyeballs. But I was patient. I learned more about hunting and fishing and anything. We talked about anything other than school and counseling. 4 years later, we had our first conversation. Real, open, authentic. He told me about something that was really bothering him. But it took him 4 years to do it. And then at graduation, he even gave me a hug. Pre-COVID, of course. But, you know, sometimes it's just going to take you a while. So to be patient with those kids and let them figure out where they're comfortable. Next slide, please. So the next one is all about boundaries. You know, students that are impacted with trauma, these are things that are out of their control and they feel out of control. So making sure that you're very clear on the expectations. Like, when you come to my office, this is what you will expect from me. And I always tell students at freshman orientation, what you're going to expect from me when you come to my office is I will not answer my phone. I will not check my cell phone unless it is my children, because unfortunately they're still going to come first, but you're not going anywhere. I'm just going to need to pause you. And I will not check my email. You are the most important person, minus an emergency from my children, that's going on right now. And they know to expect that. And some of them are even surprised, you know, my phone will ring and they're like, you can get that. I'm like, no, I'm good, mute. And it just becomes an expectation. I would set office hours. This is partly for your own good as a counselor, but also for the good of your students, that they know what to expect, that they know that whatever your hours are, 7 to 2:30, you're available. But come 3 o'clock, you're not available. But give them some other resources of where they can get help if they need it after 3. I would have policies in place for when you're out of the office. I feel like a lot of students that have been impacted with trauma, they find that adult and they cling to that adult. Then when they have an outburst or when they're feeling that dysregulation and that adult's not there, the whole day is shot. So a lot of what I do with students that I know are only coming to me, find them another adult, help them build that support system. And I often talk about, if I'm not here, where are you going? You know, and a lot of students are like, oh, I'll just go to the bathroom. No, you won't. The bathroom's disgusting. Where are you going? And we work on that. And so that way they have some backup options. And it builds their trust that, oh, there's more than one adult that's okay, and I can go to them. Next slide, please. Okay, so I know this has been mentioned before. I know Amy mentioned it as far as an ASCA position statement on discipline, and we've talked about ways that you can kind of somewhat be involved. So please don't think that I'm wanting you to assign discipline. Not even close. What I'm wanting you to do is look for those ways in which you can step in as the person who has knowledge of trauma and knowledge of things that impact students and how that is affecting their discipline. For example, a student that I had was dealing with some trauma and had an outburst in class. The teacher probably would have written him up for either disobedience, disruption. It could have been anything from, verbal language to the teacher. There's a number of things that he could have gotten assigned points and ended up in ISS. But as a counselor, I can step in with a teacher and say, you know what, let me work with him for a minute. Let me see what we can do, and then let's go from there. So not only does the student get to stay in the classroom, but they don't get punishment that isn't warranted. So look at your student code of conduct, see any of those low-level behaviors that you might be able to make an impact in, things like sleeping, disobedience, classroom disruption, profanity. Those are the kind of things that we see. Cell phone is big in high school. So find things that you can do. One of the other things you could do is restorative practices. If you've never done any work with that before, I know, it seems to be really big in kind of elementary and a little bit in middle. It can be used at the high school level. Let me just say that keep her name out of my mouth. Okay, that's a phrase that, I just want her to keep my name out of her mouth. That's all the time. So instead of letting that build up and up and up and up and up, and now we're in a fight, we're suspended, and we have discipline, let's start small. Let's do some restorative work. Let's figure out what's really going on. 9 times out of 10, they actually like each other. And it's also typically over some other romantic relationship that they don't want to be in. So you can make change that way. I would also encourage you to consider what's called a counselor on call. We have had instances where the counselor and the teachers all have, the relationship that, okay, this student is one that we need to keep our eye on for a number of different reasons. And that student goes to class and something happens. The teacher's going to call down to the counseling department and say, hey, look, Johnny's just having a bad day. Can you come up here? So again, get out of your office, go and meet the student where they are, let them step out, kind of figure out what's going on, see if they're ready to go back to class or not. But just having someone on call to physically go where the student is. Positive behavior plans, IEPs, 504s, do what you can to serve on those teams. Here at our high school, some things that we do is talking about things, and I know we've mentioned it at the elementary and middle school level, but like a chill pass, being able to take a break from class, that's something that you can mention when you're in these meetings, and find other ways that the student could use, 5 minutes here, or can they get a drink of water? Can they do this? And being able to put those things in place in the plan. All right, make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. Next slide, please. I don't know about you guys, but do you ever feel like you've got something in mind, you're ready to present it, and then it's like the stars align to give you more to present? Well, that happened to me today. So I'm getting ready to leave my house to come to my office today to do this presentation. I check my mail, and what is in my mailbox? But the latest edition of the ASCA School Counselor magazine. And I'm nervous because I don't do presentations very well, and so I'm doing my best. So I'm flipping through this morning and I'm like, maybe it'll help me relax. So on page 24, wouldn't you know, this says combat compassion fatigue. And I have a whole slide on self-care. And so, and I'm like, yeah. So make sure that if you're not getting this magazine, go and get it. I've read through it. It's a great article. It's got some really good strategies on self-care. Or for those of you that were part of TASCA's virtual conference in June, Dr. Laurel Ross presented, and she was phenomenal. But she mentioned soul care. And so when I'm talking about self-care, keep in mind that it is soul, it's mind, it's body, it's soul, that inner part of you that you've got to take care of. And so especially during any day, you want to take care of yourself, but especially when you're working with students that have been impacted with trauma. You know, I know Lauren and Ann mentioned regulated adults better help to regulate students. So making sure that you're in the right frame of mind, you're in the right place yourself in order to help them. And so this includes making sure that you take breaks. You know, we deal with students that deal with a lot of heavy things. And we would like to be able to sit there and say that, oh, we're not affected, but we're human. And so find a place in your building or in your car that you can just take a few minutes, do what you need to do. If that's cry, scream, jam out to some rock music, whatever it is, do that so that you can get back to the work that you're doing. Be willing to kind of assess your own emotions about topics to make sure that if a student comes in to talk about a topic, that you're the best fit for them. And it's okay to admit that you're not. Find another counselor or find another person that could help you with that, just to make sure that you're giving that student the best that they can get. And then lastly, I would say find your marigold. Those of you that started off teaching, you may have heard this before. I did not, but my sister is a teacher. And so this is really something that they talk about for new teachers. And so it can be found on the Cult of Pedagogy website. And I believe I referenced that in our reference page, but it came out in 2013. And I think it's so relevant for counselors because it's under the idea of companion planting. I'm not a gardener, but I love the idea of companion planting because you plant certain plants near others because of the benefit that one will give to the other. So certain plants are put side by side so they can help nourish or whatever. Well, a marigold is probably the best companion planter because they ward off bugs and harmful weeds to the plants that you stick next to it. So when you think about being in your building, if you're fortunate enough to have someone there beside you that's another counselor, maybe they're your marigold, maybe they're not. If you're in a building by yourself, find your marigold. It could be another teacher, it could be an admin, it could be the custodian. Whoever it is, find that person that's going to encourage you and is going to help calm the voices of negativity, because they're coming, and find those people that will push you and say, yeah, you can keep doing this. Yes, you're right on. Yes, I got you. I love what you're doing. And stick close to those people because they will definitely be the ones that will help you bloom to the best that you can. So then if you'll go to the next slide, this is kind of our references and resources that we used. But if you have any questions or you want more information about this, you can always put it on the Discord. And then we're going to be answering questions here in a few minutes. Just kind of anything that you've been putting in the chat or you have up coming up. So I'll turn it back over, I think, to Dr. Wilson, who will start our Q&A.
Let's see. The first one is, I think this goes back to the beginning when Lauren was talking. Does it cost to bring the facilitators in, the ones who do the Building Strong Brains? Is there a fee that's associated with that?
No, that's the wonderful thing about it is you can find a trainer who will come in and present for free. Typically, I think they have a list by region so you can find someone locally, hopefully. I know they continue to offer train the trainer events. So you can, if there's no one in your district, you can become a trainer, or in your region. It's phenomenal. It's really great to host it for your staff, but then also host it for community stakeholders, parents, anybody from the community, because then we're all speaking the same language. We're all coming from the same foundation, and then we're looking, and like you talked about, Amy, our advisory councils, like we can all start working towards the same goal.
Excellent, thank you. The next question is for Lauren as well. Do you have any lessons that you can share that focus on brain science?
I do. I mean, I didn't create all of them. I kind of piece, what we do. We piece together all the great things from all the work that people have done. I started with an interactive notebook the first time I started teaching about brain science. And there was I think it was TPT. So I started with that, but then I took the strategies from social thinking. I took some strategies from the incredible flexible brain. I took, I pulled different things and just started making those foldables. And then this past year, I did a digital notebook where each lesson was a page in their notebook, and they had to take, it was kind of like guided notes for my, I had fourth grade. I had K2 and 4 this year. So for my fourth grade, that's 4th and 5th is where I really hit the brain science part. They're kind of, I think, a little bit more developmentally ready for it. We do upstairs, downstairs brain with as young as kindergarten for regulation, but really getting into the nitty gritty parts of the brain is for a little bit older. But I do have, I think we have a slide with our contact info. So if somebody wants to email me for my resources, I'm totally cool to share.
Excellent, thank you. The next question is, if a student's trauma is happening at home and they are afraid to go home, what can we do as school counselors to help them? That's a tough question.
I'll start for my group, and then maybe because you may approach it differently at each level. With kids from, pre-K to 5, depending on what your school levels are, I think the trauma could be abuse. And whether it's exposure to domestic violence, that is a DCS call. That is considered psychological, emotional abuse. So if they are expressing to you that they're afraid to go home, my first response would be to call DCS and to have other people involved, because like the person said, this is happening at home. We have no control over that. And we are not the ones able to go into the home and investigate. So we need to bring in the other professionals.
I would agree, depending on the situation. If they tell me they're afraid to go home, there's probably a DCS call there. I also have we have a school resource officer that I worked really closely with, and he is very good at developing safety plans with students. And of course, this is with the student's permission, but I've sat many times with him and a student for hours talking through, okay, what do you do in this situation? And he's also crisis trained. So he's really good at working with them on what to do in different situations and talking to them at their level. But I think it's really important that they know how to, we do what we can at our end. We call DCS, we do what we can, we support them in the school. But I love that we have the resources to offer safety plans and what do you do? And the technology is difficult as the technology can make our lives sometimes, it's such a blessing that we have the ability to say, this is how you get in touch with us, because there are a lot of tricks to the technology that even if it's a shut down device, you can call emergency services. And there are a lot of things that kids don't know. So, some people have access to a school resource officer, some don't, but to find a safety person who will help you talk to the student about a safety plan, identify people you can go to in your life who can help you, and how to get in touch with them in those emergency situations. Our kids have a school device, and so a lot of them, even though they may not have access to a phone or whatever, they can email, and then those emails go through a filter. And if they use any certain words in the filter, they get sent to us. So we've been able to help students after hours in a number of ways, just by making sure they understand how to reach for help.
And I would agree at the high school level, most likely it's going to be a DCS call. The only probably difference would be if you're working with an 18-year-old student, that can change things a little bit. And not that I would ever encourage it, but it does come up a lot of times when you're working with 18-year-olds, is they will want to leave home. And so helping them work through a plan of, how is that going to happen? Is that really a safe place for you? What's going to happen if you decide to go back home? How is that going to play out? So really helping them kind of process through what that's going to look like, because I think it does look very different when you're 17 versus when you're 18.
Absolutely. I know even times when I was a high school counselor, I had to reach out to Adult Protective Services sometimes for our students that were over 18. So absolutely. Thank you, ladies. And the next question is, how can school counselors help cultivate a trauma-informed environment across their school community?
I think a lot of the things that we all have said about making sure that you offer those trainings, and it's more than just training people. Just like I mentioned, a teacher who was very, just allowed herself to be very vulnerable and real with her class about how she managed stress. We have done a lot in the last year. I did a lot in my building about resilience with staff, but and working through, we would have breathing exercises and just some of those meetings in the morning, 5 minutes before students walk in. And, some people had prayer meetings, some people had breathing exercises, just really working on some of those. So I think sometimes modeling that with the staff, showing them the grace they need. I think a lot of times about, the top down, we want teachers to teach students a certain way. How are we treating the teachers? And just really allowing that to be a top down process, and everybody getting grace, everybody being allowed to have a moment, everybody being allowed to work through their process and being vulnerable and being celebrated for that. To me, that's a big part of how you have trauma informed, because you are trauma informed with everyone.
And I would add to kind of what she was saying in going back to the data. If you've ever listened to anything from ASCA, it's data, because we're data informed. So, and what I'm going to get at, we're going to get there, but if we want them to be trauma informed, because that's what we want, and that's what we speak, and that's what we know, maybe if you start by saying, academically, this is what we're seeing. So let me try to impact this academic. Now, we all know on the back end that we're going to be working our little tail off to get all these other things put in. But if you go to where the numbers are and you go to the achievement, that's what your admin's going to want. That's what your teachers are going to want. We're going to get there, and this is how we're going to do it, and start putting in those things.
Absolutely. And then I think lastly is it's going to take courage. Trauma informed really starts with self-reflection in the adults in the building, and being willing to notice or challenge the practices in the school that actually may be traumatizing to some of our students based on race and culture. And here is where we see the culmination or the combination overlap of everything that's happening in our society at the school level. And if, for example, if you take a look at your dress code and you see areas of your dress code that are not equitable, where certain populations, race, culture are not allowed to express themselves because of some stereotype or some generalization, that is a practice that could be traumatizing to a student. And that's the type of, we think of trauma as it happening at home a lot, and that's true, but it also happens at school. And people with very good intentions maybe continuing practices that are at the school level that are traumatizing to students. And that's where I have gotten the most pushback. And I think that's where a lot of work has to be done. Coping skills are awesome and necessary, and they're necessary to use while you're doing this work because it's pretty humbling. However, we've got to get to the point where we're willing to challenge these practices that have been around forever.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. The courage it takes to be an effective school counselor and pushing this trauma-informed approach is so needed. And then being able to use the data so that we can speak the administrator's language, right? That they can understand where we're coming from, that it meets their needs as well as the students' needs. And then just having grace for everybody who is in that community, because it is trauma-informed work is hard work. All your answers were excellent. The next question I have is, as school counselors provide trauma-informed approaches in the services they provide, how can we help get buy-in from administration? How can we get them, and I think we kind of answered that a little bit, is getting them to understand the power of this work and how it can positively impact academics and the behaviors. Do you have anything to add to that?
And maybe it's because, in my defense, I am coming off a 6-hour training on data-informed work with an Ask a Specialist, but I'm going to go back to the data. Yes, achievement data, but you can also look at discipline data. If you're looking at the behavior, so those, the kids that are running away or skipping class or, outburst behavior, whatever it is, if that's where they're seeing the struggle, okay, you can make a point in that and say, okay, this is what we're going to look at. This is where our focus is this year. This is the change we want to make. This is how we're going to make it happen. We're going to go individual. We're going to do small group. We're going to do lessons. And then at the end of the year, be able to show that report to say, this is what we did. This is how I did it. Because just being able to say, yay, go me, look at me go, that's great. But you've got to be able to show a chart that says, this is mathematically what I did. So yeah, sorry, I'm going to go back to data today. No, I'm not sorry, but.
No, right, don't be sorry, because that data advocates that and shows the work that we do is extremely valuable. So absolutely.
I have to say, to riff off your data, if you've done a data dashboard, I ran an after-school program for at-risk kids in our school several years ago, and it was actually the year of the shutdown, so we didn't get to do testing. So I did not have achievement data or growth data, which was sad. But since we had done really comprehensive data to choose these children to be in the program, we looked at discipline and attendance and scores and all of it across the board. So it was a lot to put together. But in the end, the things we learned about it are the things that just make all of us happy, but especially administrators' little eyes light up, because we were able to show of all of our students. So the semester before we started the program, this group of students had 26 discipline write-ups. The semester that we did the program, which was an after-school program where we built relationships with students, they had one. So, I mean, it was just those relationships. The kids had somebody to go to. But yeah, so yes, the testing and achievement data, but if we really take the big view of data, we can just show, we do amazing things. And you're right, we should show them.
Oh, I love it. The power of data. I stress that to my students in Foundations of School Counseling every semester. Excellent. So the next question, what are some trauma-informed approaches school counselors can practice specifically to address COVID-19 as students are coming back? Cases are going up. There's some fear there, particularly for children, who are not vaccinated. So what can we as school counselors at each level do to help support coming back to school with COVID-19?
I'll kick us off, but I think it kind of goes back to what Amy talked about. We have to be careful making assumptions with trauma, because not everyone has negative impacts based on their support system. So I think it starts with a needs assessment. We want to make sure that we're putting in school-wide interventions or supports as far as, hey, we're still distancing, the hygiene, all the safety practices are still going to be in place, making sure that they're getting accurate information. But then we have to use our needs assessments to see if there's students who are needing more supports at more like a tier 2, tier 3 level. And maybe those are the students who are also experiencing other traumas or other mental health issues. And then this is just kind of what we're seeing. That's the surface because, my anxious brain is stuck on COVID. But actually what I'm really struggling with is an anxiety disorder that really, it's manifesting because we have this issue right now. So I'm a little bit cautious, like putting it all onto COVID, especially even with elementary kids. Also, again, back to the adults, regulated adults in the building and at home, giving kids the type of information that they need to empower them to take care of themselves during a pandemic, I think is the most helpful strategy, because coping skills are great, but if you're surrounded by adults who are fearful and dysregulated, it's tough for kids.
And I want to agree with everything that Lauren said. I love that we did a needs assessment last year and found out our kids were much more concerned about COVID than we thought. There was a lot more anxiety around it. So I love that we start there. But I would also say, I feel like a lot of our kids lost a year of social development. And at the middle school level, I would love to see a lot of focus. Bethany talked about restorative practices, which I love because I'm a restorative practices trainer. But intentionally working on relationships and social skills and building those, not even just necessarily as a response to specifically COVID, just a response to being away from each other. Even if we don't have anxiety about COVID, I think we really have some developmental concerns about where we are. A seventh grader this incoming year isn't what a seventh grader has been in the past because they've missed so much of that. So really intentionally working on relationship building and practicing those skills.
And I would add in just some things that I personally am going to do. I don't know, across the state, every district handled last year completely different. And so for our district, we had students that were able to choose either virtual or in-person learning. And this year, it's going to be somewhat of the same, but there's a lot of students that, due to either just not being successful at virtual last year and wanting to be back in the building, or because our students were able to get vaccinated if that was their choice, that we have a lot of those students coming back. So being able to look at who specifically was virtual last year and coming back traditionally, and just monitoring them for the first couple weeks to see, because they may do just fine, but this could be a huge impact. We have some students that will be walking into our building for the first time as sophomores. So they didn't get all that freshman stuff where we take care of them a little bit for a year. They missed that. And so just kind of being very mindful of the students that are coming in and what they need and kind of going from there.
Yeah, that's definitely going to be something on the forefront of everybody's minds. I know as parents, that's definitely on my mind as well. The last question I have for you guys is, what are some trauma-informed approaches school counselors can practice that specifically address racism that students may experience? Based on their religion, their race, their culture, how can we support those students as school counselors?
I think it's important to find out, they're the experts. So I think we need to find out, what do you need? How is this affecting you? I might have an idea of how it might be affecting with any trauma experience. Like I might have an assumption about how it affects someone, but that's coming from my own worldview. And as much as I try to learn and expand my knowledge and my awareness, I am never going to know enough to be able to be qualified to tell someone, oh, you need this. So I think really finding out, how can we help them? That humility of, I want to help you. I am your ally, but I don't know how to do it. And I want to do it respectfully. I think that's really important for our students and our families, because I think, there's a lot of people who are hurting and they don't know who is a safe person in the school to talk to. So I would for me, I would approach it with that kind of cultural humility that I don't know. But I do have this like big, huge toolbox of strategies. Which one of these might be something that would be helpful for you? I don't know that there's a set way. You need to do this, and this will support this race or this culture. I think it's very individualized when it comes to supporting self-regulation.
And I agree with that. And I love that when we talk about individuals. I also think this is one of those things that this is one of those courage areas. And it's, it's even silly to call it a courage area sometimes, because it's so coming from a place of privilege. Like, if you have the privilege, you should be using it. And it can be difficult to walk into a room full of people who feel differently from you and call them out on it. But it's just the right thing to do. And sometimes I think our kids need to know that there's somebody who's going to speak up for them. If there's anything that makes you a safe place, I don't know. It can be. You still have to work there. I'm going to say it. You still have to work there. You have to have relationships with the people you work with. It needs to be done respectfully, and it needs to be done from a growth mindset for everyone, but it needs to be done. So.
And probably the one thing I would add is, I think what's been said before, but I'll just say it again, be very reflective on yourself. And, just being transparent. This past year, I think it was all my years run together. So it was either this past year during COVID or the actual year before that. But I remember, working with 2 students that were heavily impacted by race in our building, and felt very uncomfortable in a teacher's classroom because of an assignment that was given. Now, as a white woman, I have no idea what that's like and couldn't even begin. So going back to what Lauren said of getting their view, what do you need? What are you expecting? What are you wanting? And then I went to a colleague of mine who I knew would better understand, because she and I have a relationship, we'll go back to that, where we have been open and honest about some of these conversations about race and culture. And so I asked the students, I said, can I invite her in? And so we had a conversation, the 4 of us, and I even excused myself and let them have a conversation. And the students left not only with a better understanding, but they also left with what they wanted out of it, and then allowed me as the school counselor to serve as their advocate to my admin and to that teacher to see if maybe that assignment could be rewritten or given in a different way. That way it wasn't so kind of blatant in your face. And so that's what I think, definitely be willing to say, I don't know, be willing to ask for help for people that you can get that information from, and then take that information and run and advocate and be the person standing there with the megaphone saying, this has to change, this has got to be different. And then I think there are silent ways that you can do it. There's a sticker on my door. I just looked at it a few seconds ago. It's a safe space sticker from Glisten. That sticker has been on my door for years. And the students that know what that sticker is for, and it's for the LGBTQ plus community, the students know that because of that sticker on my door, when they walk in, it's a safe space. So finding ways for you to not only be the kind of the squeaky wheel loud voice, but finding ways that you can silently invite them in and they can come to you. I think that would be kind of that.
Oh, that's excellent. I appreciate all of your responses on that. I think that was very powerful. Because it's been hard for a lot of students, I think, this past year, and the experiences they've had to go through. And so knowing they have somebody in their corner, I think is just incredibly valuable as a school counselor, and also that our standards kind of tell us we have to, right? So it's the other part to that. Two more questions that have popped up. Sorry about that. One is specifically for Lauren. What specific needs assessment do you use, or do you create your own?
Again, it's a mishmash of all the best things that I found out there. And I'm happy to share the one that I used last year. We actually used one that was kind of our normal needs assessment. And then we added COVID specific questions. And I'm no longer working in a school, but if I were, I would do that again. Because even though we're not under the severe lockdown like we were before, there is so much in the news about lots of recurrences and variants and all of that. So I am happy to share what I use, but I usually piece together what kind of makes sense. I've aligned them with the ASCA mindsets and behaviors so that it looks at connectedness, belonging, all of the kind of the main mindsets to see how my kids are doing.
Excellent.
And the faculty and staff.
And then to everybody else, how did you, is there a particular needs assessment that you like to use, or how do you create your needs assessment for Ann and Bethany?
I could go. Mine's kind of like Lauren. I mean, it's just kind of a mishmash of things that I've seen, things that I've liked. And again, I guess, it kind of goes back to, what do I want to know? Because as adults, even teachers in the building, you think you know what they need. But, I don't know about you guys, but I did not go to high school in the middle of a pandemic. My cell phone looked like a brick that was attached to the car. So, it's just, life is different. And so I think while we think we know, we really don't know. So just finding out, the different things you want to know and leaving it kind of very open. I always use Google Forms. I'm a huge Google person. Sorry if I think we're using Microsoft. Is that Google? No. Anyway, but I love Google Forms because it gives you the data right back immediately, and you can go in and use it. So I liked that. My one advice to you, if you're going to use Google Forms with students, utilize the drop-down feature so that way they're not seeing 6 or 7 choices. It doesn't look as long, and I wouldn't make your needs assessment super long. Students in our district, I feel like there was one year that they were hit with a different survey every couple weeks, and the counseling department needs assessment just got lumped in, and they just started clicking some stuff because they were just done. So make sure that you can explain it well, don't make it too long, and make it kind of concise when you are in there.
We use different ones throughout the years. I absolutely what they said. I love the idea of backwards planning. What do you want to know? Where are you going with this? That kind of thing. I will tell you one of the favorite ones that I have done in the past, and it's a little bit different. We do minute meetings, but we have done a minute meeting form and used it as a needs assessment. So it's had 2 parts. It has an open-ended question part that a counselor I worked with back in the day developed initially that was just genius. And then it had part where they could check areas they need help that we kind of use as the needs assessment. The open-ended questions, though, they're more to deal with. It's a lot clunkier. You can't make a cute graph out of them, but I just can't not love them because the questions were just genius ones. Something that makes school easy for me, something that makes school difficult for me. The heartbreaking one was always one thing I hope this year. And some of them were, I hope I make all A's, I hope I make the cheer team. Some of them were, I hope I make a friend. But just, again, absolute gold. Just could not do without them. And we've used them both ways. We've done them on forms. We've done them hard copy. So you have to do what works for you. If you're a big old computer person and want to get those on forms, do it. Don't be afraid of doing it hard copy. Kill a tree. It's worth it. Sorry, don't tell my daughter that. But there's so much good that can come out of it. So I love the data, but let's not pigeonhole data either. it's nice to be able to make a graph out of it, but sometimes we need that squishier stuff because it tells us so much.
Absolutely. Well, ladies, we did post your information on a slide that we made available to viewers, so you may receive some emails asking more questions. At this time, we're going to invite Dr. Clark to come back on. And I just personally want to say thank you so much for your participation, for the knowledge that you shared, and just for the work that you're doing with our students out there, especially during this past year. It's been extremely hard and different, and we certainly appreciate everything that you have done. So welcome back, Dr. Clark, and I'll turn it over to you.
I'm so very inspired to see these professional counselors on our screen today. If these are the hands that our schools and our children are in, we're in good shape. So I really want to thank all of you. But at this time, I'm going to ask Ann and Bethany if you'll go off screen, and we're going to give a few minutes to Lauren, who is representing TASCA today, and would just like to hear what's going on with TASCA. What announcements would you like to make on behalf of TASCA today, Lauren?
Thank you so much, Dr. Clark. We are currently beginning our fiscal year 21-22 planning and looking for anyone who today is inspired to get involved in advocacy. We have many committees where we're trying to build more leadership and get some depth to our bench, basically. So if you feel inspired, please reach out. We have a race and equity committee. We have a professional development committee, communications, social media, legislation and advocacy committee. So we've got lots of ways for school counselors across Tennessee to serve. And we are partnering with NCYI this year for the Scally Conference. So we'll be heavily involved with that. And we have a great lineup of breakout sessions and keynote speakers. So we're super excited about that. And we'll continue with our virtual, probably monthly, bi-monthly PD, quick little ways for school counselors to get, whether they're needing their hours for their licensure or just wanting to increase their knowledge. So we have a newsletter, emails, lots of ways to reach out to us, and we welcome you. We just came back from ASCA, LDI, and Delegate Assembly all fired up. So please join us.
Thank you, Lauren. Again, I continue to be inspired today just hearing from all of you. So thanks, Lauren, and you can go off screen now, and I'm going to talk with Dr. Wilson just a minute. Dr. Wilson, we've come to the end of our first summer academy, and so tell me, what do you think?
I absolutely love it. I think this is going to be an exciting opportunity for school counselors to connect across the state, to share great ideas, and just to empower their own programs that they have within their schools. I think today, talking about the power of relationships and community, the power of hope and developing our students from that strength-based approach, and the power of planting seeds, that it may take a while, but that's what school counselors do. And just what we bring to the school community and how we can help with the needs of our students. I think it's just been a phenomenal day. I think the speakers were amazing, and I'm really looking forward to the future collaborators that we have.
Well, Dr. Wilson, I want to give you a special thanks for co-moderating today, because you were able to really make enriching Q&A because of your expertise. So, you know, you're a school counselor too, but you just happen to be training them as well. So you have a great perspective that you bring to the collaborative. Thanks so much for your leadership.
Thank you.
I look forward to working with you as we plan and continue our future events for the School Counselors Collaborative.
Thank you.